Hello and welcome to Mind Shifters Radio. I'm Tim Hayes. I'm your host for the first hour. And today is Wednesday, April 28th, 2021. It is the 118th day of the year, and we're grateful to everyone who's joining us here today to spend another couple of hours teaching and supporting people in using some of the most powerful, effective, efficient, and accessible tools I've ever discovered to improve the quality of my life, manage my emotions and relationships, and turn the negative emotional states that I may experience from time to time into part of the infallible guidance system that we are all gifted with. These tools are available absolutely free at whyagain.org if you go to that website and click on the red and white bullseye or the link in the upper left-hand corner of most pages that says Start Here. It will take you to a page where you can download and read Chapter 24 of Dr. Michael Rice's book. His book is titled Why Is This Happening to Me Again? And that chapter of that book provides a narrative description of the primary tool in this work. That tool is called the Reality Management Wake-Up Sheet or Worksheet process, and it's available absolutely free on that website as a PDF file. You just click it and download it, print it off, and use it as often as you'd like. You can also go to your app store and type in the three words Heartland Aramaic Forgiveness and get access to a completely free and private app that contains the Reality Management Worksheet, an abbreviated version of that worksheet process, and a copy of the Dragon and Klingon game, which is a wonderful way to introduce these tools to even younger audiences. If you do that, which we encourage people to do soon and often, get access to the tools, put them to use in your own life, and then give us a call if you have questions or comments or testimonials. Our call-in number is 563-999-3581. And if you call that number and press 1, it'll put a little question mark by your phone number, and I will announce it by your area code, and we can have a conversation. We are in the year where we have made the commitment to do the Course in Miracles workbook lessons, and this is the 118th day, which means today is Lesson 118. It's a review. It's a review of Lesson 105, which states, God's peace and joy are mine. Today I will accept God's peace and joy in glad exchange for all the substitutes that I have made, substitutes for happiness and peace that were never satisfying. Lesson 106 says, let me be still and listen to truth. Let my own feeble voice be still, and let me hear the mighty voice for truth itself. Assure me that I am creation's perfect product and offspring. So on the hour, we're called to recite the Creator's peace and joy are mine, and on the half hour, we are called to remember to say, let me be still and listen to truth. Let me be still and listen to truth. In the book, the Pam Grout, The Course in Miracles Experiment, her lesson 118 is titled, Change the Plot Points. She quotes John Krakauer as saying, the only person you are fighting is yourself and your stubbornness to engage in new circumstances. She writes, for morning and evening review, I gladly exchange my pretend world for peace and joy. And then, in the evening review, there's a mighty voice broadcasting a completely different story. She writes, a group of cells about the size of a gumdrop hang out at the base of your brainstem. This control center, known as the Reticular Activating System, RAS for short, sorts and evaluates incoming data. It sends what it thinks is urgent to the active part of the brain and steers the non-urgent stuff to the back. But while it's organizing, it's also interpreting, drawing inferences, and filtering out anything that doesn't jibe with your story. The good news is you can change your story. You can exchange the plot points that the reticular activating system is currently sending to the active part of your brain to the plot points we're promised in these lessons. It's as straightforward as 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes before sleep. Change the story. Change what you focus on. Change what you expect to see. And it changes your experience of life. In the morning, Creator's peace and joy are mine, and in the evening, let me be still and listen to the truth. So those are our offerings for today from the Course in Miracles workbook and Pam Grout's Course in Miracles experiment book. And we have plenty of time for a conversation. 52 minutes left. Our call-in number is 563-999-3581. And if you call that number and press 1, we can have a conversation. What's on your mind today? We had our support group last night, and we listened to a Guy Finley talk from, I think, April 18th. And it was one of the unusual talks where he only talked for half an hour instead of an hour and gave an extended time for Q&A. And it was a multifaceted talk as usual with Guy Finley. He told some stories, which was what he used to do almost every talk. He'd have 2 or 3 stories in a talk, and that's why I enjoyed some of his older talks more. And again, it's pretty much exactly the same thing that we're looking at. All deep spiritual truths run pretty much uniformly across all wisdom schools. And the truth about how it's an inside job, and the truth about how if I rationalize being negative, and I let my mind tell me how it's acceptable for me to be angry, bitter, resentful, violent, insulting, etc., then I stay trapped in that cycle of negativity. And he was talking last night in the pattern of building bridges over troubled waters, and the understanding that psychologically speaking, any troubled waters that we experience are of our own creation. And there isn't any need to build a bridge over those troubled waters. There's only a need to see that it isn't the waters that are troubled, it's our mind that is troubled. And if we can step into the realization of how we are creating the experience of upset, then we can start to engage that part of our mind differently that can construct a different experience of life. And again, that's exactly what the Course in Miracles lessons are trying to help us do, to become aware of how actively we are participating in the creation of our experience of life. If I can understand that, I have a saying I've been using for a number of years now, and it's distilled out of the Course in Miracles and Way of Mastery, but it says, I want to tell you 2 things. The first thing is, you have the infinite capacity to choose the focus of your conscious awareness in each new given moment. The second thing I want to tell you is, it is the focus of your conscious awareness in each new given moment that is what creates your experience of life in each moment. There's no wiggle room there. That's just the way it is. You are an infinite creator. You're always creating. And you don't have any choice about that. What you have choice over is, Are you going to create from the positive perspective, from the contentment, gratitude, appreciation perspective, or from the grievance perspective, as the Course in Miracles would call us to let go of our grievances? Well, Guy Finley says that very same thing slightly differently. He's a writer and far more poetic, and he says the same thing in the following phrase: as goes my attention, so comes my reality, my experience. I only experience what I pay attention to. As goes my attention, so comes my experience. We are creating our experience of life in each moment by what we choose to focus and pay attention to, and how we choose to interpret those things that we're focused on. And one of the things we're called to in this work and every other true spiritual teaching is the recognition that everything about my life experience is an inside job. So if I can understand that anytime I'm experiencing something that's unpleasant, as Michael Rice would say in one of the earlier worksheets, if I'm in pain, if I'm having a negative emotional state, it means I'm in error. My thoughts are off the mark. I'm focusing on the wrong few bits of data, or I'm creating a negative interpretation from the right bits of data. And so once I recognize my active role in creating my experience of life, and I step closer and closer to that 100% responsibility for everything I'm experiencing, physically, mentally, and emotionally, the greater control I have over my experience of life, and the better my life becomes, because unless I'm completely irrational, I start to move more and more towards the creation of a life that's based in appreciation and joy and aliveness and creativity and respect and compassion. And I'm creating what some would call heaven right here on earth. I think it was just yesterday that I was reading from the Tao Made Easy and talking about how most spiritual traditions talk about the apocalypse. And the Tao is trying to help us understand that the apocalypse is here now. The apocalypse is all the greed and the warring and the conflict. It's not about an apocalypse that's going to be coming. It's not like the end of the physical world as we know it, that most people turn that into to generate fear. The recognition is that there are human beings all over the planet, day in and day out, that are creating, contributing to, and continuing to build the war, the famine, the bitterness, the hatred that is the apocalypse. And once we become aware of our active role in the creation of that process, we can choose to step aside and create differently or dismantle that, our part of that process. We don't have to wait for some time to come when there might be a volcano that explodes or some other natural disaster, some other natural occurrence that we label a disaster. And we can begin actively working within our own minds each and every day to dismantle the process that contributes to the apocalypse that is already here. And that's what this is about. This work is about the Reality Management Worksheet and making it available to people absolutely free and encouraging them to use it every day. And if they don't get out their pen and their paper and write every day, to at least every day be using the mental short version of it, which is the recognition that if I'm in pain, my thoughts are in error. So let me cancel everything I think I want and ask to be shown a different way to look at this situation. Let me understand that There's always another story. There's always another way to look at the very same data points and interpret them. On a regular basis, I'll have people come into my office and be working with me, and they'll tell a story, and at the end of the story, I'm thinking, wow, they did a fabulous job with this situation. And they're in tears or in rage, beating themselves up with the conclusion that they did it all wrong and they're not good enough, etc. And I'm just shocked. And sometimes I'm successful in getting them to see my interpretation of the story that they just presented to me, and sometimes I'm not. Sometimes it's just, I have to let go of trying to get them to change because they are so hooked on their story. And I remember one very powerful situation, and the woman was describing to me how she handled getting through having a miscarriage when she had to be caring for her 4-year-old daughter, and her daughter was, insistent that her mom let her into the bathroom because her daughter was not familiar with the people that were in the house at the time, and she was feeling this, what people would call anxiety, reactive attachment disorder anxiety, whatever you want to call it, separation anxiety. And so this woman described how she let her daughter into the bathroom and played with her with toys on the floor, and all the while she was having this massively bloody miscarriage, and she was able to do the whole thing, and her daughter was not at all aware of any of it. Her daughter was just focused on the toys they were playing with on the floor. And at the end of it, she was just crying and sobbing about what a horrible mother she was to let her daughter be in that situation, to expose her to that. And I was listening to the story from her perspective, and all I saw was world-class protective mothering, loving, supportive, tuned to the child's needs, putting her own needs aside. Same data points, arranged differently, dramatically different interpretation of events. And we do this all the time. And one of the core pieces of this work is for me to wake up and understand that every time I interpret my life events or my actions or someone else's actions and I come up with a negative emotional state internally, the most useful thing for me to do before speaking or acting is call a timeout, turn the focus inside, and dismantle the negative interpretation and the negative emotions that go with it, because those emotions are distorting my perception. And I don't care how accurate I think my view of the world is, if it's leaving me feeling grief, rage, hurt, confusion, it's not an accurate picture I'm seeing. That's one of the core observations in this work. And if it's a really important situation, as so many of the things in our lives we think are, then it would be a really good thing for me to get an accurate picture, rather than running around taking action impulsively based on a flawed picture or a partial picture or a distorted interpretation of an accurate picture. I mean, most of us have, at this point in our lives, have had exposure to what might be called what is the word for these? Distortions in perception. You look at a vase, it's a picture of a vase. No, it's a picture of two people looking at each other. Optical illusions, right? Most of us have seen these things. Look at this picture. What do you see? Do you see a young woman or do you see an old lady? And as you change your perspective, as you change what you're looking for, the picture that your mind shows you changes. The external stimulus hasn't changed at all. Right? Is this a rabbit or a duck? I'm just barking out some of these that I've seen, these optical illusions that are common, certainly on the internet these days, but it used to be that to find these you'd have to go to a puzzle magazine or you'd have to go to an introductory psychology book where they were studying this stuff because they were studying perception. And what most people don't even slow down enough to realize is how fascinating it is and what it can reveal to us about our own process of perception when we are looking at the same stimulation, the same picture, the same light bouncing off the picture that we were 5 minutes ago, only now we can't see what we saw before. We're seeing something completely different because somebody said, look, notice how this is a horse running and not a picture of two boys playing. And all of a sudden, once I see, in quotes, quote, see, close quotes, the picture of the two horses running, now I can't make my brain show me the picture of the two boys playing. Now that I see a rabbit, I can't see the duck anymore. But when I first look at the picture or the image on the page, all I saw was a duck. Well, let us step into realizing that this simple tool of these optical illusions is helping us see why it's so useful to have a reality management worksheet. Because every time I have a negative emotional state, the very best use of that emotional state is for me to use it as an alarm system and turn my focus inside myself with the realization that no matter what I might be seeing accurately, I'm either seeing it inaccurately or I'm interpreting it negatively in a way that it doesn't need to be interpreted. And unless or until I can dismantle that negative interpretation and or the negative emotional states that I'm generating with that interpretation, I'm not going to be able to act in a way that's likely to result in my best interest or the best interest of the people I love and care about. And that's why we encourage people to pick up a reality management worksheet anytime they're upset, anytime they have sadness or fear or emotional hurt or they feel betrayed and they're absolutely convinced that they're justified in raging at their friend, their neighbor, their husband, their wife, their sister, their brother. Well, yeah, you can justify raging, but that doesn't mean it's going to be beneficial for you to rage. That doesn't mean you're going to be able to make any kind of a positive change in your life experience. And what we're interested in with this work is helping people proactively make changes in their life, make choices in their life that improve their life. Move from the negative emotional states and the alarm system telling us that we're in error into a space of productive response to life events. I had somebody in the office earlier this morning that was talking about, her word for it is, she has the wrecking ball of rage that gets started in her. And once that gets started, she's off to the races. She is not thinking clearly, and she knows a part of her mind is telling her, this is silly, you want to go scream at somebody, you want to go reverse this business deal, you want to go, firebomb that business. And she knows better than to do that, but she doesn't have the capacity at this early stage in her work to stop that wrecking ball of rage process, that automatic response of the negative emotion, and all of the hurtful things her mind tells her to do in response to that rage. So the most, useful thing, and she's been able to do so far, is to just stop and to give herself a timeout and to start, breathing, tapping, using a meditation app on her phone, doing the reality management worksheet, just interrupting the process in her own thought that's generating this rage before deciding what to say or do differently. And one of the things I offer that's been so useful in my own work is the realization that it's kind of an adjunct to the concept that it's all an inside job. How many different ways can I look at, can I have reminders for myself that it's all an inside job? Well, there are several of them in the bottom line observations that I give people in a first or second session. One of them is the fourth observation that says, I can only control and be responsible for my own emotions and reactions. I can't control or be responsible for the emotions and reactions of anybody else, no matter how hard I try. Another one is, what happens to me and around me in my life is not nearly as important as how I choose to interpret and respond to those circumstances and events. The next one is, I will never be upset by anything anybody else ever says or does or refuses to say or do that I think they should, unless I'm still judging myself negatively for doing the same or similar thing. This is a big hang-up for a lot of people. And they say, you know what, I never, slapped anybody in the face, and I never screamed at anybody and called them horrible names, and I never raged against people like that, and I would never do that in public like that. And if we're just willing to play with these observations on our own and look at it from a variety of different perspectives, we're quite likely to wake up and realize that, maybe I've never done that to somebody else, but I talk that way to myself on a regular basis. Maybe I've never actually done it, but boy, I have fantasized about it a lot. I've fantasized about punching somebody in the face or stabbing somebody to death or having them have a horrible car accident so I wouldn't have to deal with them. The more different ways I challenge myself to understand that it's all an inside job, and any time I have a negative emotion going or an upset state internally, the only productive thing for me to do is take all of the focus of my attention off of the outside world and turn it inside me and figure out, with the aid of some of these observations or tools like the Reality Management Worksheet or Ho'oponopono or Byron Katie's 4 questions or the Sedona Release Methods questions, turn the focus inside myself and explore, ask to be shown, how am I creating this upset? The last thing on the list of bottom line observations is also relevant here. It says, whenever I have a negative thought about myself or somebody else or a negative emotion, I can instantly know 3 things. The first one is, this is false or it's based in a lie. Number 2, it's not about what's going on in the moment. This is an old tape playing. I'm never upset about what's going on in the moment. And the third thing is, if I take an action from a negative emotional state or a recurring negative thought, I'm only going to make my current situation worse. There's no way I'm going to improve anything about my life when I act from a negative emotional state. It can't happen. I can't make my situation better by pouring negativity into it. I remember a number of times when I've given a talk and I've burst into the old adage, we got to fight fire with fire. Well, there's nonsense in that. That's not ancient wisdom. That's idiocy. You are never going to find a fire department where their tanker truck is, they send it out to a fire and it's loaded with napalm. It's never going to be loaded with an accelerant. It's always going to be loaded with water or foam or something to stop the process of the fire, not to add to the process of the fire. We are never going to solve the hatred problem we have by hating those who hate, or even by hating hatred. We are never going to have enough wars to establish peace. I'm never going to be able to act from a space of a negative emotional state in a way that's going to lead me to an improvement in my life. Whatever I do to act from a negative emotional state is just going to make my situation worse. Only, always, and forever. Therefore, one of the best things I can do whenever I notice a negative emotional state or recurring negative thought is interrupt my impulse to act outwardly and turn the focus inside and ask to be shown. How can I look at this situation differently? What, if anything, might I change in my interpretation of events to have a more positive interpretation of the very same data points? How might I learn to look at something other than what I'm focused on? Pam Grout mentions the reticular activating system in her book, and the research on this part of the brain is amazing. This is the part of the brain that if you go out and you buy a new or a used car and you've never had a Toyota before, but you buy a Toyota, you start seeing Toyotas everywhere. You never really noticed how many Toyotas there were. Or it's so dramatic that you're noticing them so much more often that you literally begin to think, oh my gosh, when I bought a Toyota, everybody in my neighborhood decided to buy a Toyota. And there's been no change in other people's habits. The only thing that's changed is your awareness. You see what you're looking for. We always see what we expect to see and what we're looking for. If we expect problems, we see problems. If we expect things to work out smoothly, they work out smoothly. If we expect things to work out and be very torturous, they're very torturous. The research on the reticular activating system is what has given rise to people putting up signs like, start seeing farmers, start seeing motorcycles, because literally, after people, especially in the Northern Hemisphere, they go through a winter where there aren't very many motorcycles and there aren't very many farm vehicles around, people stop looking for it. They only expect to see cars. And even though the light of the sun might be bouncing off of a motorcycle or a tractor, the image of the motorcycle or the tractor may not register in the brain of the driver who's just not looking for that. Michael Rice has talked about this several times recently. There's been research where they were doing brain mapping for cats, and they mapped the activity of the cat when a bell sounds. And there's a part of the brain of the cat that registers the bell and lights up when the bell sounds. And it's reliable. Every time you sound the bell, the cat's brain recognizes it and fires, and you can see that part of the brain in the cat get active, and you know that the cat has heard the bell. You don't even have to see a response from the cat externally. You can see the brain, the part of the brain that's responding to the noise of the bell. But then if you put a mouse in a glass cage in front of that cat and ring that bell, there's nothing in the cat's brain that registers the noise of the bell. The cat is so focused on the mouse that there is nothing strictly showing any kind of a chemical or electrical activity in the brain of the cat. So quite literally, the noise of the bell is not showing up for the cat, even though we know mechanically the air that vibrates, that creates the sound, is reaching the cat's ears. It's just not registering in the brain. Why? Because all of the cat's focus is on the mouse in the cage, in the glass cage. What we expect to see, Course in Miracles says it this way: we must learn to understand the distorting power of the way we want things to be. What we're looking for, we tend to create in one way or another. If we're looking for ways to be irritated, we'll find them. If we're looking for ways to feel gratitude, we can find them. If we are willing to accept this increasing all the way up to 100% responsibility for what we're experiencing internally, we can develop the skills that allow us to craft and create an entirely different experience of life, even though the external experiences may not change very much. Ever, or it may take a while to change. But the bottom line is, we can change our experience. I have the blessing of doing this work in therapy for all these years, so I know how powerful the dynamic of choice and focus is, and how powerful the practice of gratitude can be. I know how many people have 10, 100, 1,000 times more money than you do, and they're 10 times more miserable than you are. I know that everyone has their issues. No one skates through life without upsets, without insecurities. I know so many people that think, and this is, part of the stuff that comes out of the Tao Made Easy, they're talking about this. So many people think, when I finally get this, when I finally get that, when I finally get enough money, when I finally have a different house, when I finally have the perfect relationship. And if you follow those people, and they actually do acquire one of those things that they're convinced they need to have in order to be happy, once they've acquired it, whatever that joy factor or contentment factor is a very temporary relief or change. And the bottom line is, in anywhere from minutes to hours to days to weeks, they can be miserable. I remember listening to a lecture from a Harvard psychologist, and he started off, the lecture is about happiness and what makes us happy. And he started off with a question. He said, by show of hands, how many people think they would rather, they would be happier if they won multiple millions of dollars in the lottery rather than becoming paraplegic, meaning losing the use of your legs? And of course, every hand in the audience shoots up, and he says, okay, Fact of the matter is, it's a trick question. You're all wrong. And then he explained, these two populations of people who have won millions of dollars in the lottery and people who have become paraplegic after having the full use of their arms and legs. These two populations of people are populations we have a tremendous amount of data on because psychologists and sociologists have been studying these groups. And he says, by self-report, this is critically important. This isn't somebody on the outside judging. This is by self-report. The happiness quotient, the contentment quotient of these two groups of people within 1 year of winning multiple millions of dollars in the lottery and becoming paraplegic after having the use of your legs is the same. There's no statistical difference in these groups of people in their happiness quotient. And if you're like most of us, you look at that and you should be shocked. What do you mean I'm not going to be happier a year after winning multiple millions of dollars in the lottery than a year after losing the use of both my legs? Happiness is an inside job. It is not created by the things we accumulate and identify with. Guy Finley says it this way. He says, how could this thing that you think you want to acquire to get happiness, how could it possibly be tied to your happiness if the moment you achieve it, now you have to be afraid that you're going to lose it? How could it be responsible for your happiness and in the same moment be responsible for your fear? It's just a mind game. It's just a false perception. It's a completely unproductive set of conclusions. It's a trap. It is one of the many examples of sustained incoherence that David Bohm talks about. There's that movie I Am with Tom Shadyac, who is the producer and director of a whole bunch of movies, comedy movies, Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, and things like that. And he had a traumatic brain injury that left him with post-concussive syndrome, and he was a millionaire when this happened. So he had all kinds of money to try and explore all of these complementary or alternative or wacky different kinds of treatments for his crushing headache and disorientation and all those things that go with post-concussive syndrome. And he got lucky, and the pain let up, and he realized from that experience that when he was thinking he'd rather die than go on living because the pain was so bad, and he had millions and millions of dollars, but he couldn't, enjoy them because the pain was so bad. And he began thinking about life and about all the things he'd seen on the news, and so he decided to use his talents as a director and interview some of the best minds in the world about how is it that we create such misery in the presence of such abundance. And one of the things that he talks about in that movie is that people kept telling him, you're a millionaire now, you need a bigger house, and you're a multimillionaire, you need a bigger mansion. And he talks about the day that his realtor closed on his next new big house, swimming pool, tennis courts, etc., circular staircase leading down to a massive foyer in the front by the front door. And he said that the real estate agent handed him the keys and said goodbye and walked out, and Tom Shadyac sat down and realized that now he's got possession of his house, and he doesn't feel any different than he did 3 or 4 houses ago. The acquisition of the outside thing is not what's responsible for the good feeling that we have. So Abraham says, listen, in recognition of everything that Guy Finley talks about, and how can what you get be responsible for your joy if in the next moment it's also responsible for your fear that you might lose it and then lose the joy? And Abraham says, what you want when you decide you want a big house, you want a fancy car, you want the perfect relationship, you want a bigger stereo, what you want is the feeling you believe you're going to have, that pleasant emotional state, that contentment, that safety, etc., that you think you're going to get once you acquire it. So Abraham says, so do yourself a favor and create that emotional state. Because, as Abraham says, your most important creation in every moment is your emotion in that moment. Your most important creation in every moment is the emotion you're feeling in that moment. So then Abraham says, so if you have an urge to get a fancy BMW sports car because it's going to be so thrilling and you're going to feel so accomplished and it's going to be so, give you that buzz, find a way to create that emotion of that sense of accomplishment and that buzz and that gratitude and that feeling of being a success. Create that emotion first. Then, if you still want the car, go get the car. Because then you'll have that emotion whether the car comes or goes. Whether somebody steals the car a week after you've got it, or whether somebody rams into it and the insurance won't pay for replacement. You still have the capacity to generate the emotional state that you were craving and thereby improve your experience of life moment to moment, independent of the external circumstances. And that's why we teach these tools, because anytime I'm creating a negative emotional state internally, if I wake up and realize that the only reason I'm feeling this anger, this sadness, this fear is because of my internal processing, then I can choose to change it. I'm not a prisoner of that negative emotional state once I recognize that I'm creating it. It's critically important for me to be able to observe what is it that's creating my upset, my sadness, or my fear, or my anger, or my resentment, or my hurt. Because once I recognize how and where and why it's being created, then if I really don't want it, don't want to keep experiencing it, now I've got options for changing it. But if I'm blaming it on the outside circumstances or on the accident of birth and I was born to a poor family or I was born in a war-torn country, if I'm blaming my experience of life on those external factors, then there is nothing I can do. I don't have access to anything that can change it for the better. So we're encouraging people to step into the questioning of all of these things they've been taught about how they're only upset because this, that, or the other thing. And we're encouraging people to step into the practice of the use of these tools like the Reality Management Worksheet, the Mind Shifter Targeted Journaling Tool, the EFT tapping, the breath work, soon and often, so that you can discover your infinite capacity to choose the focus of your conscious awareness and how it's the focus of that conscious awareness in each new present moment that actually creates your experience of life in that moment. And we would be happy to support you in creating a more joyful, a more loving, a more gratitude-based experience of life moment to moment in any way we can, especially with support in the application of these tools. So, our call-in number that Susan just used is 563-999-3581. Welcome, Susan.
Thanks, Dr. Tim. This shouldn't take very long. I have a confession to make. I woke up in the middle of the night remembering Laura McGowan's chapter on lying. And I have a confession. The story about the book falling off the bookshelf, the book was leaning up against the pile of books on the floor. It did not fall off the bookshelf. I needed to tell you that. And I need to tell Michael that I want to stop doing those little stretchings of the truth or lies outright and just allow that whatever happened is good enough or maybe even a miracle in itself. The fact that my eyes fell on it would have been enough of a story, but it's been bothering me a lot, so I thought I'd call you up and just lay it out there.
Well, congratulations on choosing the truth. You know what they say about that?
Nope.
It sets you free.
I always heard this phrase from Chinese adage, he who lies must have long memory.
Exactly.
That's also...
Yeah, oh, the tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. That's the way I first heard it. And a few years ago, after having all of this work with Michael and watching the Anil Seth video, it came to me to say, oh, the tangled web we weave when first we practice to perceive. Because each of us is creating our own perceptions. And the Course in Miracles has a line where it says something like, perception was created as an attack on God. Perception is an interpretation of what is rather than a direct relationship with what is.
Right.
So congratulations for choosing truth and freedom.
Well, maybe I'll feel that later. I just feel embarrassed. I know it's not a big deal, but it is a big deal. It just is a big deal.
So what part of it is a big deal for you?
Admitting it, admitting that.
So it's a big deal in a good way or a big deal in a bad way for you, personally, in this moment?
Big deal. I guess it's both. Big deal because it's admitting something embarrassing. Big deal because I'm admitting something embarrassing.
Okay, then I strongly encourage you to do a worksheet or two, do some tapping and breathing, perhaps reread that chapter a few times in Laura McGowan's book.
Yeah, maybe I should. I remember being struck with it at the time and identifying. I said, well, I do that too. But then I did it, and I didn't even think about it until I was recounting it to you when we were going over the previous day's extra work with Michael. And I found myself saying it to you and modifying it a little bit because I thought, oh, my God, this just didn't happen that way. And then last night I woke up with this Shrek thinking, okay, full disclosure now. Yeah, it was hard to do it. I trusted that you wouldn't be mad, but it was hard anyway.
And let's be honest, if I generate anger over something like that, I have my own work to do.
Yeah.
Right? That's not, there's nothing in that where you would be making me angry. And that's one of the things that we're so powerfully trying to help each other observe in this work. It's an absolute lie every time somebody tells us you made me angry. Every time we tell somebody else, you're hurting my feelings, you're upsetting me, you're scaring me. It's an absolute hallucination.
I get it. And I also realize that your anger is the least of it. this is a very early thing. I'm afraid you won't want to talk to me anymore. You won't like me. If you like me, you won't like me anymore. And that I'm always walking a thin line between being acceptable and being a bit too much. This is all very early mother stuff popping right out there.
Well, so I'll just say it again. Congratulations for choosing truth, peace, and freedom. Because that's, the only way I can have that is to accept it. Right? It's the truth of my life. It's right here. I can either pretend it's not here and generate all kinds of upset, or I can accept it. And then have life.
Yeah, I want to practice this a lot. It's in our radio show culture, at least the intensive. There's a lot of hyperbole, and this isn't anybody's fault, but anybody's concern than my concern. But to keep quiet and to say what's really true and only as much as true is going to be a big discipline for me. I tend to go to wanting to be pleasing, say wonderful things, do lots of thanking, appreciating, and much of the thanking and appreciating is really through. Stop giggling. What are you laughing about?
I can't stop giggling. If what you say strikes my funny bone, I have to giggle. So just notice how defended you are when you're doing all of those things, and then just notice what you're defending from, because that's the path out. Guy Finley has a whole host of stories in his old work where the knight or the princess is trying to win out over the dragon or the monster, and they gird themselves with all the special armors and all of the prayers and medallions and everything. And in every one of those stories, the bottom line is they have to strip off all of their armor and walk in naked.
Oh yeah, that's it.
Because and this is right out of the Course in Miracles, where it says, when you defend, you're creating the experience of attack, etc.
Yeah, exactly. So, I can feel it.
Yeah, and so my chuckling is just seeing you just throwing down the shield and throwing down the sword and taking off the helmet and taking off the armor plating. And then when you act from your perfect safety, you get the experience of your perfect safety. And Course in Miracles would call it, your invulnerability and your vulnerability and all that crap. But the way I've sorted it out better for myself is to say, you are either vulnerable or you have the perfect safety that existed when you were created by your Creator and is part of your existence and can never be taken from you. So I realize we've done it again. Thank you for chiming here in the last few minutes, and congratulations on your choice for truth. I know from my own personal experience that it will be a relief for you.
Yeah.
Jeannie's here. I will remind us all that we come from love. We're made of this stuff we call love. We actually are love, and everything else is false. Welcome, Jeannie Rice.
Thank you, Dr. Tim. It's been a great conversation. I got lost in it and didn't realize the time was up. So,
well, have a wonderful show.
Yeah, it was really good. Thank you. Thank you.